Greetings in St. Lasal, fellow Lasallians, mga dude parechongers. Hi, hello, and welcome to today's session of Checkpoint, a Lasallians mental health awareness podcast.
You know the usual. It's a safe space to open up about any and all of our concerns, especially the ones that affect our well-being and those around us, but are a little hard to get out there in the universe by ourselves.
That's right. Perhaps when articulating them with words, sharing them with other people, and putting things into perspective, our shoulders can get a little lighter and our minds a little clearer.
Exactly. And maybe then we get to see how we can remedy these problems. As a community, it's good to help one another however we can, if we can, when we can. So with that, what will we be delving into today's session is all about LaSalle. Well, technically,
It's because there's a lot to unpack in the life of a Lasallian. I think we can all agree that it's easier to point out the negative when talking about university experiences.
Definitely. I mean, our education does take up a lot of our time and effort, but how these affect our mental health is supplemented even more with how much everything else one has to juggle alongside work, at school, or at home.
it's not really about how we can deal with this ourselves. More so, how the burdens can be lessened if it's possible, specifically by the DLSU admins, faculty, and even our fellow students.
Spill the tea? No, but do grab a drink and make yourself comfortable. We have a lot to discuss. So then, first things first, admins. In the LSU, they almost entirely encompass the ones managing operations in the university. Changes in schedule, advancement of events, enactment of certain policies, handling documents, tuition, student welfare, and more. Basically anything under the sun regarding the LSU, they're basically the main authoritative body for all of that.
Absolutely, or in theory, they should be. It's clear that there are noticeable gaps in the way the admins direct these processes, and these then pile onto the students, so much so that students take it upon themselves to initiate proper channels of communication for the benefit of other students. Most of the time, the USGs or other branches of the student government's presence can be felt more than the admins. Additionally, this problem is even intensified further when the administration denies the initiation set by USG, despite it garnering approval from all undergraduate levels.
I'd have to agree with you. It's one thing for student input, and it's another for students to have to take it as their responsibility to get these done. The large number of concerns that should be solely directed to the admins are being dispersed to our student gov to sort through and address. These students do not get compensated for this work, right?
Yeah, there's a high standard of running DLSU colleges as a collective, but we are also students too. We have work all the time, whether it's our own studies or personal matters. These are sometimes not our first priority, as we try to juggle these with doing the work of the admins. Like, you don't even get to see the administration post appreciation towards the students. Like, although the student body does have the initiative in posting appreciation towards their dean listers or best officer on their respective course pages, you don't get to see the administration do anything. In fact, you have to go through such a lengthy process just to get a certificate rather than it being given to you automatically.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. Then we get to what the students can't account for anymore, like procuring needed documents that take too long to be completed, understanding complicated processes, enlisting for financial aid because of the high tuition expenses. These are out of our control, but often get mishandled, and it can be so frustrating.
It is frustrating indeed, Molly. The process of acquiring documents is lengthened even further when the students have to wait for months until they get the requested document. And it's another thing when their queries or concerns aren't being addressed promptly or properly. This is questionable given that the students are the ones mainly left to manage the amount of lack the administration has.
What do you think is the proper response to this if we were to address the DLSU admins? For sure, let me clarify that no one is putting down the work that they do. Running the institution requires the effort of so many people, but it's meant to create an environment that supports the student experiences. However, it looks like that's not the case with how things are now in that aspect.
Although the ability to manage the school is indeed commendable, it should be known that the students can thrive and flourish in the university without sacrificing themselves to the point of exhaustion. With the excessive reliance on the students to keep the learning institution operating, they are met with an encumbrance that seizes their development and well-being. Having a flaky administration accumulates to the abundance of health, academic, and financial predicaments students endure in order to sustain themselves and possibly other lives and their responsibility too. Furthermore, this damages the trust the students have in their own administration, believing that they are working against them rather than with them.
And if we don't have confidence in them, it clashes with their portrayal of the LaSallian core values to ours. I agree with your sentiments, Sven. We are a community. We must be one with our vision of positive growth for everybody, starting by having constructive discourse that we can then put into action through inclusive changes.
Moving on to the backbone of every school, the faculty and teaching staff of the institution. Off the top of your head, can you think of one thing that a teacher has done before that has impacted your mental health one way or another, Rue?
To start, the rules set by the school are being broken by the professors themselves. When it comes to deadlines, there are always going to be some professors who blatantly ignore the rule for there not to be any work assigned to students a week before and after a school break.
I can definitely attest to that, Rue. It's extremely frustrating given that these rules were set in place so that our workload wouldn't be super taxing on the students. The fact that some professors fail to comply with this is pretty disappointing, honestly.
Right? Not only that, but some professors are disorganized too, to the point where it inconveniences the students as well. For instance, I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally missed class, not knowing there was class in the first place since it was never mentioned by the professor that we would be having it, given that our original schedule was set for it to be asynchronous. And alternatively, also instances where I wasted time waiting for a class, only to be informed afterward that we weren't meeting.
It's incredibly stressful, and to be frank, a waste of time as well. The time we spend waiting could have been time spent on other pending assignments, or even towards taking care of ourselves.
And we aren't able to do that either because of how disorganized some professors can be at times. Don't get me started on the random message notifications I receive sometimes from my professors at the crack of dawn or very late at night.
Oh, those. It's so funny to me that some professors require us to respect their working hours, which we do, of course. Yet those same professors are also sending us emails or posting announcements really late to inform us of something that should have been announced during working hours only.
I've honestly resorted to switching off email and school notifications after my personal working hours. It's really frustrating and stressful to see them when I'm trying to catch a break at the end of the day.
You know what? I completely get you, Rue. I don't like it either when my work seeps into my personal life outside of work hours. There's a reason why work hours are set in the first place. Moving forward, have you ever experienced a professor who wasn't the best at teaching their subject material?
Definitely, Sid. It's sad because the way a professor teaches can completely make or break whether or not a student likes their subject. I know I've, unfortunately, grown to dislike some subjects because of the professor's teaching style. This goes for my high school experience as well.
Yes, it can be really stressful as well, having to study the course material on your own to understand it when what the professor teaches is not really comprehensible. Like, as much as I want to do well in their class, sometimes even the professors themselves make it hard to do so, sadly.
I'd even go so far as to say that this lack of security has impacted the mental health of students. I think the school needs to do a better job at not just regulating, but also implementing the rules they set in the first place, for the sake of both the faculty and the students.
Speaking of, we should talk about the very soul of the institution, the students themselves. What do you think are the various problems they've been facing, especially froshies such as us?
I can't speak for all, but as a frosh in the College of Liberal Arts, I can say that there's certainly little to no room at all for individuality, making us pack our schedules with meetings and dependent outputs as they continue to expect group outputs from us.
Yeah, it makes us less flexible with our time, especially for outputs such as reflections and essays. It even takes away our family, friends, and me times. Like instead of working on weekends, we tend to cater to meetings or catching up on internal deadlines.
Yeah, and not to mention the freeloaders who make the outputs even heavier, like from the stories of my friends. I've heard them literally lose days worth of sleep just to finish up those quote unquote freeloaders assigned tasks.
And not just freeloaders, but also the ghosters. Whenever they become MIA without a heads up or when things are getting pretty hectic with requirements, they clearly take advantage of other students.
Oh, yeah, I've actually had my fair share of experience with a ghoster. And it was definitely not a pleasant experience, I can tell you that. Especially when you want everyone in the group to contribute. It sucks that freeloaders and ghosters alike don't get proper repercussions from their ineptitude as students. What more is that usually those who pick up their slack are students who are part of organizations and such. Like, imagine how hard it must be to juggle both org and academics.
I agree. As a member of some organizations myself, I can vouch for the fact that DLSE students are quite involved in organizations. Some students would even go as far as joining 5 organizations in one term. This then affects their responsibilities in both their academics and extracurriculars as they tend to get overwhelmed with the amount of deliverables needed to be accomplished.
Yeah, I understand. I've actually been there too, you know? Personally, what adds even more to the stress is the competitive nature, especially if you're aiming to become part of the Dean's List. Being part of DLSU, it is a given that the tuition fee is quite, pricey than other universities. Well, I guess it's the price that we have to pay for quality education. And given the economies right now in the Philippines, not everyone is financially stable.
At this point, the Dean's Lister status is not just an accomplishment, but it also serves as a means to acquire financial assistance from the school through scholarship programs. The stress and pressure then takes a toll on students' mental and physical health brought by financial problems. I know that as kids, we shouldn't worry about that too much yet, but millennials really do care about finances and how it affects the livelihood of not just themselves, but their families.
Yes, exactly! Even if you get accepted to other universities, of course it's different to say that you've graduated from the Salle University. For others, it really becomes worth the trouble, don't you think? And speaking of that, I think that the fast-paced nature of the deadlines and lessons really contribute as well to the stress and pressure you mentioned earlier. We're not even taking into account at this point possible personal issues and heavy extracurricular deliverables that students may face. So imagine just how toxic this environment could be.
Speaking of a toxic environment, the juxtaposing competitive and non-competitive cultures that stems from diverse backgrounds of the students contribute to this non-conducive environment for personal growth.
Based on my experiences, I think we should cultivate really strictly academic days and rest days. I think that professors should perhaps take this as well into account, not just for their well-being, but for the students as well. How can I phrase this? I guess, take this. Organizations would discourage their members to work on Sundays. Or perhaps taking it out of a university scenario, corporate scenarios, wherein employees are given the weekend off to relax and to reset their minds. The students should also have a day or two in a week that completely discourages them from working and instead focus on quote-unquote me time or family time. This avoids a student from burning out.
Adding to that, since I have a hunch that hybrid classes will be the new educational trend, I believe that we should have a designated sync time only. Like having sync classes from 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. only. Students are in front of their devices for a long time. The least we can do is minimize their time on Zoom, giving them time to AFK wherein they can eat and sleep away from their monitors.
Ooh, I like that suggestion. Especially since the online class setup has deprived students from resting in the comfort of their own homes, since, well, this is where they also work and study. We might as well give them fixed times, you know? Night classes, they seem like a hassle for those who wish to rest or spend time with their family at.
Yes, that is why the admin and the students must work hand in hand to create a conducive learning environment. Both parties will be able to make one another's lives easier if we focus on what's important at the core of this, ourselves.
Yeah, I think that to really establish a mentally safe space for everyone in DLSU, we should focus on our well being since neither will be able to progress and grow if we focus on quantity over quality. We must put ourselves first, and that
Mental
includes
health
our.
goes a long way. This does not just cover academic facets but also personal factors, including their exposure to social media. It can manifest different triggers and dysphoric tendencies that could lead to anxiety, depression, and other mental issues that can be resolved with a simple, wag mo isipin yan.
Yeah, people could really abuse such exposure. For example, using public spaces like the DLSU Freedom Hall, you're familiar with that, right? It is one thing to call out someone or let them take accountability for their shortcomings, but it's another thing to blatantly abuse such a space for personal gain.
We should instill the values taught to us by the institution in which we must respect everyone, encouraging inclusivity everywhere you go.
The Lasallian core values are taught to us not just to understand the foundation of the institution, but to also shape us into model citizens. That includes being sensitive, understanding, and wholesome beings who care about the well being of not just ourselves, but for others as well.
There needs to be a fundamental change in the attitude of how they handle all of that. Being student-centered, for one thing, the toll on students from mental taxation to emotional injury cannot be prevented or at least leveled to a manageable degree if our concerns aren't taken seriously. It's the things that involve our welfare, like breaks and mass suspensions. These are usually initiated firstly by the USG. Why is that? I just think that there's a disconnect, even if they are intended to help with those very things. DLSU's administration should be actively engaging with the students to form a connection. Through this, they are able to operate with the students in mind and truly portray a university that works hand in hand with the students for their professional and individual development. Furthermore, DLSU admin should be able to actualize projects that are aligned with the students' needs and ensure that healthy productivity is sustained.
The Salle University faculty need to do a better job at implementing and carrying out the rules set by its administration, and be more mindful of when the deadlines they set for students are. The faculty cannot carry on disrespecting the work hours of students, while simultaneously requesting that students respect theirs. Not only this, but the faculty must also be more organized in terms of scheduling meetings with students. Should a meeting turn out to be synchronous on a date where a student expects it to be asynchronous, and vice versa, the professor must ensure that they inform the student in advance as much as possible, to avoid instances where students waste an hour of waiting to be let in a Zoom call that won't turn out to be happening in the first place, or instances where students end up missing their class. Both the students and the faculty must work hand in hand to make sure that the students are not only attending class, but are also actively digesting and understanding the material. On the professor's end, this means ensuring that the students at their level can understand the material being taught. It is only when the faculty and students work together to respect each other on a professional level and an academic setting that students can thrive in an environment supposedly made for them to perform well in the first place.
We hope that this mental health checkpoint has enlightened the DLSU community. Mental health must never be taken lightly, especially during these trying times. As a community, we will always strive to understand one another and break down communication barriers in hopes that we make the university a safe and open space for everyone, catering to those of different backgrounds, sojis, and struggles. Remember this, you are valid, and we see and hear you. we will always lend an open ear and a shoulder to cry on. Never hesitate to ask for help. After all, being a Lasallian means to strengthen our spirit, to engage in community mission, and to exemplify zeal for service. Now don't forget to drink your water, eat your food, and smile today. This has been a mental checkpoint, and we're glad you've made it this far. Live Jesus and mabuhay! We'll see you soon. Have a great day ahead.